Hello, today we'll be recapping the 2019 horror and adventure movie, Crawl. The movie begins as our protagonist, Haley Keller, competes in a swim relay at the University of Florida. She dives into the water and competes hard, but just misses the best time. The loss brings back a memory of losing as a child, but she remembers how her father Dave tells her to never stop working hard and be an apex predator. After the race, Haley gets a call from her sister Beth, who warns her about an incoming Category 5 hurricane. Haley thought it was going to miss them, but she is told it changed course and will hit them very hard. Beth asks about their dad and says she hasn't heard from him all day. She is worried he didn't listen to the evacuation warning and may try to ride out the storm. Haley considers driving the 2 hours to his house to make sure he is safe, but Beth urges her not to as the hurricane may hit while she's on the road. Soon after though, Haley doesn't listen and drives through the heavy rain to reach her father. On the way there she passes a nearby alligator farm, which is some foreshadowing of what's to come. She tries to call her dad, but once again it goes straight to voicemail. Haley reaches an evacuation checkpoint and runs into Beth's ex-boyfriend Wayne, who is assisting the evacuation. He refuses to let her pass, saying it is too dangerous and she might get hurt. They tell her to turn around, but she doesn't listen and speeds off in the direction of her father. As she continues driving, warnings blast over the radio which state that anyone who does not evacuate will not be able to receive help due to the weather conditions. Haley finally arrives at the house and knocks on the door calling for her dad. She enters inside and looks around, but only finds Dave's dog and not him. She drives off again, and this time the conditions are even worse with fierce winds and flooded streets. Finally Haley finds his truck at their old childhood home, which is for sale after her parents got divorced. She looks around, but again her father is nowhere to be found. She checks her phone and sees another emergency warning, and suddenly a large tree branch flies through the wall, scaring her. After searching the rest of the house, she decides to check the basement because her dog is barking at it non-stop. She turns on her flashlight and enters the old, cramped and dimly lit basement, which is already beginning to flood. Haley ventures down further through the crawl space and begins to hear a radio in the distance. She follows the sound and sees tools everywhere on the ground and 2 blood marks on a pipe. She finally locates her father, but he is passed out laying in the corner. Dave is still breathing, but has a massive wound on his upper shoulder. Haley tries to drag him out using a tarp and the dog begins to bark rapidly from above. Just as she gets near the steps, a massive alligator jumps out and blocks her exit. It chases her, and she runs away pulling her father on the tarp. Just as the alligator charges, Haley is able to barricade behind 3 pipes and the alligator turns away. Later, Dave finally wakes up and she gives him some water using a towel. He says the gator must have gotten in through the overflow drain, and questions Haley on why she came. He tells her she needs to get out now, but she refuses to leave without him. We learn Dave's legs are broken and he can barely even move. Haley's phone begins to ring outside the pipes and she decides to go and try to retrieve it. Dave tells her she needs to be sneaky, cause the alligator cannot hear them because of the rain, but it can see them perfectly. She crawls through the mud and tries to stay out of sight from the gator across the room. After a few minutes, she reaches the phone and dials 911. As she goes to place the call, she hears movement and sees the gator 20 feet away, but it doesn't notice her. She puts the phone to her ear, but looks behind her and suddenly a second massive gator jumps out. Haley tries to sprint back to the pipes, but just as she reaches her father she is bitten in the leg and dragged away. Her father screams and tries to get up, but he cannot move because of his injuries. Haley is dragged around by the leg, but manages to kick the beast and break free. As she runs, she is cornered by the 2 alligators and uses old cages to defend herself. She gets past one of them, but the second chases her and steps on the phone, crushing it. Haley finds a screwdriver on the ground and plunges it into the gator's eye, blinding it. She jumps over a pipe and lands in a small room. The gator walks right next to her, but cannot see her because of its eye, and it keeps walking. Safe for the moment, Haley cries and screams for her dad, telling him there are 2 now. She looks down at her leg and she has a large wound where the gator bit her. Outside the storm rages on, and the basement begins to flood more and more. Haley sees 3 looters outside the window and she flashes her light at them and yells for help. One of the looters notices her and walks towards the house confused, and in the background a giant gator leaps up and attacks another woman. He turns around and sees her being dragged in the water, but in a second another gator attacks him and bites his leg. Now bleeding, he runs to the store where one looter remains, and tries to warn him. As he screams to stay out of the water, he is dragged under and the looter does not hear the warning. It's too late, and he is killed and Haley watches from the basement in shock. Back inside, her dad tells her there is another access hatch near the steps, but she will be pretty exposed. She ventures over and finds it, but when she lifts it hundreds of spiders fall on her face and she freaks out. Haley tries a second time but is unable to lift the hatch and sees sugar on the other side. There is something on top of it and it is completely stuck. Now out of ideas, Dave tells her in less than an hour the whole basement will be underwater. They regroup, and suddenly the duo hears a boat from outside. They look out and see Wayne and the police on a rescue boat, and they scream for help. Wayne recognizes the home and heads inside calling for Haley, leaving the other officer outside. He enters the garage and looks into the basement and hears Haley and Dave calling out. They warn him not to come down and tell him there are 2 gators, and he radios to the other officer, Pete. Pete doesn't answer, and outside he approaches something caught up in a swing set. As he gets closer, he sees the tail of an alligator and sprints away. Wayne continues to call for Pete at the edge of the basement, but one of the gators leaps up and pulls him into the water. The other joins in biting him, and Haley tries to help him but it is too late. The water turns a bright red and the gators swim away. Outside, Pete suffers the same fate and is surrounded by at least 8 large gators who quickly take him down. Haley manages to get back to her father and sobs as she realizes they are going to die down here. They talk for a few minutes, and Dave encourages her saying they are gonna get out of this. He says the gators didn't like when he was banging on the pipes, and maybe he can distract them if Haley can swim out and reach the stairs. She says she can do it and tells her dad she will come back for him. The father begins to slam the pipes with a brick and Haley dives into the dark water. The gators lurk around the basement, and Sarah sees them underwater heading to the pipes. One speeds up at Dave, but just as it gets close he knocks over a large beam and it falls on it. He begins to smash it in the head with a brick and Haley sees the other one close by blocking the exit. She hides as it passes by, and meanwhile Dave finds a shovel and kills the attacking gator. The stairs are still blocked though, so Haley decides to head towards the drain pipe instead. She slowly creeps through the water and passes bodies on the way. She comes across a bunch of eggs and realizes she is in the nest of the gator. Just then, the blind gator comes through the drain and slides into the water next to her. Haley sees the remains of Wayne nearby and slowly reaches for the gun in his belt. She pulls it out and aims at the water and the alligator jumps out at her, biting her entire arm. Inside the mouth, she pulls the trigger and fires the gun multiple times, eventually killing the beast. Haley tells her father she killed one and he tries to swim to her but almost drowns. Haley now has a clear path outside through the storm drain, and she gets a big breath and swims through it. Halfway out, another giant gator swims past the drain and she pauses. She continues out below and looks up to see gators above. One notices her and charges and she makes a break for the shore, barely getting there in time. On land, she sees rescue helicopters overhead, but they don't notice her. In the basement still, Dave begins to drown as the basement fills up completely. Haley enters into the house and breaks through the hatch as her dad begins to sink down. She finally opens it and is able to pull him up by his shirt and performs CPR. She breathes into his mouth and does chest compressions as she begs her dad to wake up and not quit on her. In a last effort she pounds on his chest and he suddenly spits up water and begins to breathe. They head outside to look for an escape, but the water is too high and they can't drive. They see the looter boat across the way, and decide to go for it. They grab the dog and slowly walk to the boat, careful not to make any splashes. But the rain suddenly stops as they are in the eye of the hurricane, and they have to stand completely still or else they will be noticed. A gator swims right between them and they do not move. The rain starts again and Dave tells Haley she needs to swim to the boat and beat the gators. She dives in and barely reaches it as gators snap around her. Haley picks up her father and the dog, but a large storm wave pushes them back towards their house and sends them through the window. They are pushed around in the wave and Haley ends up standing on top of the sink. Dave finds a pack of flares and Haley reaches for a radio and calls for help. Someone answers her for a moment and she gives them their location, but the radio dies. Dave lights a flare and finds their dog and rescues it, but he is bitten in the arm by a gator and his arm is ripped off. Haley tries to help him but he yells at her to go and swim away. It chases her into the bathroom and she hides in the shower as it bangs against the glass. Haley slides open the door and traps it as she escapes from the bathroom. Her and her father climb up the steps despite their injuries. They hear a helicopter outside and Haley runs into the room with a flare, but suddenly a gator swims straight at her and crashes through the glass. The force of the wave slams the door shut and she is locked in the room. Haley tries to escape through a window but the gator bites her in the shoulder and spins her around underwater. She has flashbacks of her childhood with her father, then manages to grab a flare and burn the animal. She attempts to climb onto the roof but is attacked again, but the gator is swept away in the violent currents. With her last bit of strength she reaches up and grabs Dave's hand and he pulls her to the roof. They lay together holding hands, and the dog begins to bark as a rescue helicopter shines in the distance. Haley lifts the flare and the helicopter lowers down a rescue basket. Dave begins to cry and Haley turns toward him, now smiling knowing they are saved.